It's like you go to a stand-up comedy club at that time hoping Jerry Seinfeld will come in, and then it happened. And these people, like, it's like they won the lottery. And then he gets off stage, and then they're like, and now, from Vancouver, 15-year-old Seth Rogen.
16 years old, you get a part in Freaks and Geeks. I read that they'd lost their jobs at around that time.
Yes.
And that made you the sole breadwinner in the house.
Basically, yes.
Do you remember the instance where Jerry Seinfeld showed up?
Yes, I do. I was auditioning to get into the Just for Laughs festival in Los Angeles. And I show up, and it's during the day, which is not great. There's not that many people there. It's maybe like 5 o'clock. It's not a good time to stand up comedy. I'm like 15 years old, and I flew in for this, you know. There's comics going up and doing their thing. There's like the scout from the Just for Laughs festival there, and like I'm about to go up, and I'm next, and the MC's about to introduce me, and yeah, and someone comes over and they're like, Jerry Seinfeld is about to show up, and he's going to go up instead of you. And I was like, what? I'm like, I'm here to audition for this thing, and they're like, yeah, well, he'll go up, and then you'll go up after. And I'm like, I'm going to go on after Jerry Seinfeld? And they're like, yes. And so he goes up. He his show is still on. Like, he's as famous as you can, as a comedy star as there is alive at that moment. And it's what you're hoping. It's like you go to a stand-up comedy club at that time hoping Jerry Seinfeld will come in. And then it happened. And these people, like, it's like they won the lottery. And he comes and he just like annihilates. And then he gets off stage, and then they're like, and now, like, from Vancouver, 15-year-old Seth Rogen. And and I bombed horribly. And I did not get into the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival. And I told Jerry Seinfeld that story, and he was completely uninterested. He could have cared less.
It seems like a tough thing for a 15-year-old, a pretty horrific firing line for a 15-year-old to put themselves in, stand-up comedy.
Yeah, I think part of it, honestly, was informed by like my overall like naivete to some degree, but I also, I was good enough at it that it instantly wasn't like a viscerally painful experience. You know what I mean? And it's probably, you know, I played some sports in high school, but it was probably a similar. I imagine it's a similar mentality, where you're like, yeah, there's stakes to this and there's ups and downs to this, but overall I'm good at it and I seem to be progressing in the right direction. So it's worth the stress of it in order to pursue it, you know? And at times it's phenomenal and as fun as you would hope anything would be, you know? But also, honestly, what was more fun was at that time, me and Evan started to write Superbad. And that was like what I really loved doing. And like, I liked doing stand-up comedy and writing stand-up jokes, but like, I loved sitting with Evan and writing a movie. And to me, that was like, at the time, it's frustrating because you're like, will this ever get made? Is this pointless? Are we wasting our time? Is this just a silly pursuit? But I just loved it, you know?
There's this through line in all your sort of creative work often, which is about like making people laugh.
Yep.
Have you ever figured out like why, you know, because I've sat here with a lot of comedians, and there always seems to be something about comedians where, I don't know, some instance when they, you know, maybe they were younger or some kind of inspiration in their life, which made them somewhat compelled to, and almost energized by the pursuit of making other people laugh and happy. Does that resonate with you? And have you ever identified where that comes from in you, that pursuit of making people laugh and happy?
I think for me, I think some comedians have like a dark origin story, you know what I mean? I don't, you know? I think for me, it was like something I liked and something I was good at and something that I was very like encouraged and fostered to do from a very young age. And I was lucky enough to find another guy my age who was as good at it as I was and as interested at doing it as I was, which is like miraculous. Like, I had a lot of like, you know, I read part of that Malcolm Gladwell book, and I'm not, you know, about the about, you know, the miraculous kind of set of circumstances that it takes to become like remotely successful in this terrible world of ours. You know what I mean? And like, I think it was things like my parents were big comedy fans, so I saw comedy from a very young age. I'm from Canada, which is like a place that acclaims comedy and respects comedy. So culturally, I'm like from a place where comedy is like, a relevant part of the culture, Canadians, some of their biggest like exports are comedians and comedy shows. Lorne Michaels is Canadian, SCTV, a lot of some of the greatest comedians of all time are Canadian, and so it's something that was always kind of just always a part of like the DNA of being a Canadian person, I think to some degree as well. Also, I'm from Vancouver where they made movies, not to say it's like I grew up in Hollywood, but like you would see movie sets around, I went to a high school. They shot some movies at the high school because it was a very like cinematic looking high school. So you would see trucks and stuff like that. I didn't know anyone who worked in the entertainment industry, but like you kind of would see it around. So it made it a little more obtainable. And if we lived like in the middle of fucking nowhere and it just seemed like completely abstract, you know what I mean? So I think that like my path is honestly one of like being supported and working hard and being very diligent, but also like having an environment that kind of like bolstered my ambition. You know what I mean? Yeah.
16 years old, you get a part in Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah.
And that brings you to LA with your family.
Yeah.
What? Your entire family came to LA?
Well, my parents. My sister was in college. Yeah.
And I read that they'd lost their jobs around that time.
Yes.
And that made you the sole breadwinner in the house.
Basically, yes.
Well, did that feel like pressure? Being 16 years old and being the breadwinner for your house because your parents have lost their jobs.
In a way, it felt like an alleviation of pressure because after 6, I remember my dad telling me, like, after like 3 months or 6 months of being on Freaks and Geeks, he's like, you've made more money in this time than I've made my entire life put together. So, like, if anything was like an amazing alleviation of a weight, because there was money all of a sudden. For the first time in our lives, things could be paid for easily, and so I was more than happy to provide for everybody because I suddenly had access to an amount of money that was like absurd compared to the amount of money I grew up with access to, or anyone in my family grew up with access to,
Your work ethic, which I've read about over and over again throughout your book and throughout various interviews you've done, seems to be pretty spectacular. And one of the quotes that I read is, if there were any kind of dark driving force behind your early ambitions, quote, it would be some sense of financial insecurity.
Yeah, probably. But that's gone, which is maybe why I don't make as many things as I used to.
That's an interesting journey to go on, being driven by having that sort of financial insecurity, developing a real sort of strong relationship with work, and then that falling away.
Yeah, and it fell away pretty fast, I think, honestly. Like, I think by the time there was a point. So, yeah, I was on Freaks and Geeks and then Undeclared, and then I didn't work for years. But by then, it's not like my parents were, like, incapable of making enough money to survive on their own also. So, like, once I had some money, like, it was just bonus money, you know what I mean? Like, part of what had happened is they lost their jobs and we lived in a house. So we sold our house in Vancouver and that's why everyone moved to LA. So there was like a little more money available because we had sold our house. So like, it's not like my parents were like, just like a leech on, they were able to like make a baseline level of like survivable income. So when I had more money, it just, it kind of just added a cushion of comfort. And then there were times, then they moved back to Canada when I was like 18 and I was in LA, and that's around when I became unemployed for years and years. So I did then start to have financial burden, but it was like a it was my own financial burden. And it was not, I did not feel like I was letting my whole family down or not, providing for my whole family. It was more, I just myself was like, oh, I might have to move back in with my family because I might not be able to afford to live in Los Angeles for longer because I was unemployed for years, basically. Yeah. You
were unemployed for years and years.
Yeah.
After that first role on Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah, we did Freaks and Geeks, and we did a show called Undeclared that was on Fox in 2000, 2001, and then then I basically didn't work for like 3 years essentially. Yeah.
What's going through you're presumably doing auditions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Does it ever, like, what's that phase like of unemployment? Most people quit at that point. That's the point where you say, fuck this.
That didn't even occur to me. I did not. I was pretty kind of had like a chip on my shoulder to some degree. I was writing a lot still, you know. We were still. That's probably when we wrote Pineapple Express, you know. So we had finished Superbad. No one wanted to make it, but we thought it was good, so we kind of put it on the shelf. We're like, let's write another movie. And then we wrote Pineapple Express. So we were busy and we thought it was awesome. And we thought both the movies were awesome. And in general, we were also getting like very positive feedback as writers. We just weren't getting like hired to do anything and no one would make our movie. So it was this weird mixture of things kind of being like encouraging and very frustrating at the same time. And that's almost like the worst part about kind of being in that part of your career, which is the part of their career most people who live in Hollywood are in, which is one where it's like any given phone call is one that is like making your fucking life, or one that is yet another door slamming in your face that you have to like just suck up and keep moving forward. You know what I mean? And so that's happening a lot at that time. Yeah, and seeing your friends also start to do very well and start to make things, you know, that is, it's very encouraging in some ways, but you inherently get very jealous and you start to doubt yourself and you start to doubt if you are good enough to do it, or if anyone will ever like see in you what you see in yourself, you know?
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.